Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's workshop session. Today, we are going to be talking about lifecycle management policy on Azure. It's your host, Felix, and once again, welcome. So, in a previous video, we talked about how to create a storage account, how to create a container in the storage account, and also how to upload blobs and access these blobs using a shared access signature. I'm going to put a link to that video on this particular tutorial also. So one thing you should also have in mind is that aside from uploading blobs to a container and accessing them, you should also have it in mind that if this blob reaches a end of tenure in terms of its life cycle policy or whatever your management organization defines as the life cycle of a particular blob or data, then how do we retire this data? How do we get rid of this data? It's important to have this in mind. So, what this life cycle policy does for us on Azure is that it allows us to automatically, through a set of rules or policy, to retire certain data after it reaches its life cycle. As usual, I'm going to take us through a documentation on this. We're going to read briefly through it, then come back to our workshop environment to practicalize what we have learned on the Azure portal. So let's see what it says here. Configure a lifecycle management policy. So Azure Blob Storage Lifecycle Management offers a rule-based policy that you can use to transition blob data to the appropriate access tiers or to expire data at the end of the data lifecycle. The lifecycle policy acts on base blob, that is the blob itself, and optionally on the blob's version or snapshots. So versions are like, if a change is made on a particular blob and maybe you had enabled versioning on your storage account, it keeps previous records of the blob and also the current version of the blob itself. So we can enable life cycle policy management on the blob versions or snapshots. So a lifecycle management policy is composed of one or more rules that defines a set of actions to take based on condition being met. For a base blob, you can choose to check one of the following conditions: the number of days since the blob was created. For example, now let's say we want to be retiring data or deleting data or moving them to another access tier, maybe code or archive after a particular number of days, let's say 30 days. You can create a lifecycle management policy that would automatically move this data to a new access tier or delete them automatically from your system or do whatsoever your policy prescribes for the data. It can also be the number of days since the blob was modified, the number of days since the blob was last accessed. To use this condition in an action, you should first. Yeah, so we're going to see this also. Note, any operation that modifies the blob, including an update of the blob's metadata or properties, changes the last modified time of the blob. That is if you're using this number of days the blob was last modified. When the selected condition is true, then the management policy performs the specified action. For example, if you have defined an action to move a blob from the hot tier to the cold tier, if it hasn't been modified for 30 days, then the lifecycle policy management will move the blob 30 days after the last write operation to the blob. For blob snapshot of version, the condition that is checked is the number of days since the snapshot of version was created. That is, if you choose to include the snapshot and and the version, right? So note, lifecycle management policies are supported for block blobs, append blobs in general purpose V2, premium blob, and also blob storage accounts. Optionally enable access time. I'm going to show you how to do this. Before you configure a lifecycle management policy, you can choose to enable blob access time tracking. When access time tracking is enabled, a lifecycle management policy can include an action based on the time that the blob was last accessed with a read or write operation. To minimize the effect of read access latency, only the first read of the 24 hours updates the last access time. Subsequent reads in the same 24-hour period don't update the last access time. If the blob is modified between reads, then the last access time is the more recent of the two values, that is the modified version. If the last access time tracking isn't enabled, days after last access time greater than uses the date the lifecycle management policy was enabled instead of last access time property of the blob. This date is used when the last access time property, this is like a condition itself, a command itself. Property is a null value. For more information, so guys, let's not say too much. Let's go over to our portal to enable one. So let's say we work in an hypothetical company. Let's call it LinkedIn. Let's call it Felix Cloud Services, right? And on one of our storage accounts, we want data to be moved from that storage account from the hot tier that the data is in to an archive tier after 30 days so that it saves us cost, because saving your data on the hot tier is expensive, but saving it at or on the access tier, sorry, on the archive tier is cheap. And we want to, we want this sort of scenario where we don't spend so much on data we don't use frequently. You can create a lifecycle policy management on our Azure storage account to move data from the hot tier of that storage account or container to the archive tier of that same account or container. So guys, remember we had created an account last on our last video, storage account called LinkedIn Demo 1. So let's do this. So for you to find lifecycle policy management, if it's still a new environment for you, you can always just type it out. All right, then it's gonna come out here. If you don't want to do that, then it can easily be found under data management. That's what we're looking for. It's here, lifecycle policy management. So remember what this documentation had said. If we want to also add enable access time tracking, which is like the last time it was viewed, modified, or whatever, we would have to, enable access tracking here first before that can be done. All right, so let's add a rule now and see what happens. So let's call this rule move to archive, and we can apply this rule. You can apply a rule to all blobs in your storage account, right? That is the whole storage account itself. But one thing you should have in mind is that a storage account can consist of as many containers as possible. And it's possible that in our hypothetical company, we don't want to move data in every in every container, but in specific containers. So if you want to move it in just specific containers, you can commit to limit blobs with filters. But if you want to do it to the whole storage account itself, meaning that all the containers will be affected, you can use this apply rule to all blobs in your storage account. But you want to limit this to a particular storage, a particular container account on this storage account. So let's click here, limit with blobs. You can also click here, depending on the blob type. You can always click here to add more. If you want to add append blobs, append blob says is a continuous is a type of blob that allows continuous write of data into the blob. So it could be like a virtual machine logging or putting in logs or storing logs as a blob. So it continues on a daily basis or whatever the basis is to write more logs into that blob. So that's what an append blob is. But we are only sticking with blob. So blob says static. It's like maybe a picture, a file, things like that. Those are like blobs. So we can also choose the blob subtype, meaning that this shouldn't just be the base blob itself, that is the data itself. It should also be the snapshot and the versions of that same blob. But we're not going to be doing this. Let's just proceed to next to continue. So this is where we get to add the role, which is the most important part. You can decide to use last accessed. You can also decide to use when it was created. You can also decide to, to use last access, last modified, which was what I was supposed to say first, last modified. So when was the last time this data was modified? When was this data created? When was it last accessed? All right. So it could be that if data is not accessed in a period of 30 days, then why are we keeping this data in a particular tier? Or why do we even keep this data at all? Maybe we want this data to be deleted after 30 days of inactivity, or not being accessed for a period of 30 days. You can use this last access. Created here means from the date of creation, what do you want this data? What kind of rule do you want to set on this data? Should we move it to a different tier? Should we delete it? What should we do with this data after creation? That's what it says here. Then modified here, you know what a modification means. If when was the last time this data was modified? Like any new thing done to data? Did we add anything else? Was it edited? All these things are part of modification. So any write on a data is a modification to that data, right? So we're going to use created. So in our company, we wanted that after a blob has been, after 90 days of creation or 30 days of creation, we normally want the data to be in our environment. We want the data to be deleted. It could also be that you want to move the data to an archive or any other access tier of Azure blob, right? So we're just going to leave it here at created. So I'm going to put it here more than 90 days ago. So that's like 3 months. So after 90 days of creation, after 3 months of creation, we don't want to keep that data again at Felix Cloud company, whatever the name is, right? So after 90 days, what you want is you want to delete this blob. So you can see here that we have other options here. Move to cold storage, move to cold storage, move to archive storage. Cold here is like 30 days, cold here is 90 days, archive here is like 180 days or longer. So we want the blobs in this whatever container we're going to be choosing to be deleted after 90 days. So let's leave it here. So the next thing we're going to do here is to filter set. So this part is also very important. If we go ahead to add this rule without specifying the container in which you want this rule to be acted upon, then what that means is that you want everything in the storage account itself to be deleted, but that's not what we want. We want to limit it to a particular to a particular container in our storage account. Let's open the storage account in another tab and see what it has. So this is the same storage account we want to move our data, right? And we have two container accounts here. We have LinkedIn container 1 and LinkedIn container 2. And what I want to work on is the LinkedIn container 2, right? If I apply this policy without filtering it here, it's going to be applied both to this container here and to this container here, right? Because these are the active containers in which you've created on this link, on this storage account. Logs is automatic. It's created to monitor what happens in the storage account itself. So for us to add a rule now, we're going to add a prefix, and the prefix is usually your storage account name and a container, right, in that storage account. Or if it's a policy you want to apply to just a blob alone, you can also apply it to a blob alone by attaching the name of the blob to the name of the container itself. So let's do this here. So since I want this to be applied to just this container, right, I can easily just copy the container name, right, and so let's just copy the container name. I can copy the container name here and add the row here, right. So this is the container name. But had it mean I wanted to apply that or this policy to a particular blob alone, I'm going to add a slash, and also maybe if I want to apply it here or somewhere else, I'll just copy the blob name and append it here to this slash, to this prefix here. But I want it to be for the whole container. I want the policy to be applied on the whole container itself, which is everything here has to be deleted after 90 days. So I can just leave it here with this slash and add a policy which is going to take effect after 90 days of creation or modification, right? So this is a policy, this is the role we've created for this life cycle management. So you can always come back to edit it if you want to. I mean, you can always come back here to make certain edits to fit your current state of data management or your company's data management policy. So guys, that's all I have for management policy on Azure. It's simple and it's also very useful in managing data, the life cycle of data automatically without having to manually move data to certain access tiers or delete data after it reaches its life cycle. So guys, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and also comment on this video. And most importantly, guys, see you some other time on our workshop training. Ciao.